of people think that's what we want by saying we're Jesus and Mary, but it's not what we want. What we want is to be able to share principles with people and see what happens. And we don't even feel like we're responsible for what happens. We just want to share the principles and see what happens. That's really all we want. Now, of course, that's the primary reason why the 14 come to Earth, is to share principles and see what happens. Right? And the Earth does give you great opportunity to do this, like not on Earth, not just on Earth, but with spirits as well, while you're on Earth. So we love doing that, but it's all about the principles, loving the principles. Yeah. So unless in your life becomes all about loving the principles and then how you can express your personality through loving the principles, you're not going to find you have a very happy life.
I can see it, I just saw it today, the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most people live a life on Earth that's very like self-evolved, isn't it? It's like you have children, you have your work, you have your house, you have your, your possessions, you have your friends, holidays, all of those things, right? So you have all of those things, but all of it primarily for most people is just for themselves. And as a result of that, most people live quite unprincipled lives. And as a result of that, most people are pretty unhappy. And for good reason, because while you're living an unprincipled life, there will also be a lot of laws you break because of the lack of principles in life. So what a lot of what people call I lived a good life on earth is really interesting from God's perspective, because from God's perspective, most people have wasted their life on earth. Yeah. And it's interesting when you meet the people when they pass in the spirit world, because a lot of people in the first sphere, when they pass into the first sphere, and they believe they were good people. Like, in fact, many of them will say to you exactly what they would have said to you if you met them on earth, and that is, I've tried to be a good person in my day-to-day life. Many people will say that to you. And they're still in the first sphere. So your definition of a good person is obviously not God's definition of a good person. They're two very, very different definitions. And unless you're principled, you will never understand God's definition of what it means to be a good person. Yeah. So most people make a lot of sacrifices of principles in order to be a good person, so-called, only to find the negative results of that after they pass, generally. Yeah. So very important to understand that unless you become a principled person as God defines the principles to be, not as I define the principles to be, but as God defines them to be, unless you become a principled person as God defines one, then naturally you're going to pass thinking you're principled, but finding out that the results of your actions are put you firmly in the first sphere, and then you're going to have to learn that you weren't as principled as you believed you were. And that's a big challenge for most people. Yeah.
So, in that process, do you gather all the principles, or do you kind of focus on, a few at a time, or are they just so interchangeable that?
Well, what are the 5 things we've been focusing you on?
Truth.
So love, truth, humility, faith, principled action. Yeah. If you can focus on those 5 things primarily, your life will substantially change very rapidly. Right? Now, in each one of those 5 things, there are you could call them sub-points or sub-ideas in each one of those things. And we've talked a bit about that. We talked a bit about that when we're travelling as well, where you sort of have, aspects of equality. And there are many, many aspects of equality. And as you grow, you will start learning that every sort of quality, such as truth, has hundreds of aspects to it that are a part of truth, what it means to be truthful. But you could if you focus firstly on those 5 principles, those 5 big ones, then every other principle has some linkage to those 5.
Well, and even
One way or the
between the 5, you start to feel how much
Bound they are.
truth is so crucial to true humility, and how much love is a part of truth, and
And
how
humility,
much truth and faith are intertwined.
Yeah.
But that's why last week we talked about starting the love affair with each principle,
Yeah.
falling in love with them, seeking them out, feeling the nuances of each of them.
Getting to know them.
Yeah.
And this is when Deidre earlier wrote, asked the issue about humility, what was involved in humility with the island discussion we had, and we didn't get to talk about all the nuances of humility, like what's involved in humility. But you can see that if we had audiences that just wanted to know that, then you could share that quite easily. But what generally happens is that we start talking about a principle, and almost everybody in the audience just detunes and thinks, this doesn't really apply to my life in a practical way. This is not really benefiting me, getting out of my pain and suffering. And by feeling all of these things, the average person is actually showing to us they have no understanding of the benefit of the principle. Right? But also, in feeling those things, it makes it very difficult to discuss the principles. Because now we're going against the will of the group, trying to have a discussion that the majority in the group don't want to have. Right? And so that makes it very difficult to share these things. And so over the last 15 or 16 years that we've been teaching many of you, you've made it very difficult to share some fundamental truths without you really even understanding how. You've been making it difficult because your will has been, I don't want to live by the principle. Just, many of you have had the view, just tell me what the right thing to do is and I'll do that. Just make it easier for me to know what the right thing is to do, and I'll do it. Don't worry about that. So many of you realise that after a while that maybe you're not that sincere about doing it either. But you can see that many people on earth basically want a cult leader. They want somebody who will magically, you just got to follow what they say, and all of a sudden all your life gets fixed. That's really what they want. They want that without actually having any sincerity.
Without digging their own ditch. Brave slash bad thing. Putting in a bit of effort.
Yeah, so because we want that, and we're desperate to have this sort of other kind of influence, which basically is, tell me what to do and I'll do it, and that will hopefully make my life easier. Many of you are so prone to being misled as well. And not only misled by people on earth who are false teachers, but also misled by spirits as well, misled by them for the same reason. Because when they tell you something you want to hear, you follow that. And when they tell you something you don't want to hear, you don't follow that. And so, at the end of the day, a lot of the things that God's going to tell you in terms of developing sincerity and educating you in truth are going to be things you don't want to hear right at the moment. But you're going to have to develop a desire to hear it in order for God to even share it with you. Right? So God wants to share a lot of things with you, but can't, because you're exercising your will to not know, to not want, to not desire. Right? And so God can't share under those circumstances. Other people will, and particularly spirits will, who are in dark conditions will. And so this is why many people finish up getting quite influenced strongly by spirits who are very negative, because they'd rather listen to them than listen to God or truth. But the more sincere you become, the less that's going to happen. There are so many benefits to living by the principle. The average person on earth has no awareness at all about how many benefits would come to their life instantly if they lived more principally in harmony with God's principles. And we see that all the time. And like oftentimes when we're talking to groups, and this happened while we're overseas, You'll be talking about a principle, and 10 minutes later, like everybody's turned off. The whole audience just gone. And then when you start talking about cats or dogs, it's like the whole audience lights up. You know, they're arguing with you and fighting with you, but they're passionately involved now in the conversation. Does that make sense? Not understanding that just before we were talking about principles and nobody was there, nobody was in that state, and the principles are what's going to solve that problem, the problem of pets as well as the other problems that you raise, but nobody seems to get that because they are not understanding how important developing a principle is within inside yourself. Ivana?